The term inland port is used in two different but related ways to mean either a port on an inland waterway or an inland site carrying out some functions of a seaport. As a port on an inland waterway, an inland port in the wide sense, as used in common speech, is simply a port on an inland waterway such as a river, lake or canal. The United States Army Corps of Engineers publishes a list of such locations and for this purpose states that inland ports are ports that are located on rivers and do not handle deep draft ship traffic. The list includes familiar ports such as St. Louis, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and Memphis. A network of inland waterways including ports is developed also in Europe, China and Brazil, as an inland site with seaport function. The term inland port is also used in a narrow sense in the field of transportation systems to mean a rather more specialized facility that has come about with the advent of the intermodal container in international transport, rather than goods being loaded and unloaded in such ports. Shipping containers can just be transferred between ship and road vehicle or ship and train. The container may be transferred again between road and rail elsewhere and the goods are only loaded or unloaded at their point of origin or final destination. Shipping containers allow some functions traditionally carried out at a seaport to be moved elsewhere. Examples are the functions of receiving, processing through customs, inspecting, sorting, and consolidating containers going to the same overseas port. Container transfer at the seaport can be sped up and container handling space can be reduced by transferring functions to an inland site away from the port and coast. Distribution may also be made more efficient by setting up the link between inland site and seaport as, say, a high-capacity rail link with a lower unit cost than sending containers individually by road. The containers are still collected from their origins or distributed to their ultimate destinations by road with the transfer happening at the inland site. An inland port is just such an inland site linked to a seaport. This kind of inland port does not require a waterway. Key features of an inland port are the transfer of containers between different modes of transportation and the processing of international trade. This differentiates an inland port from a container depot or transport hub. The term inland port may also be used for a similar model of a site linked to an airport or land border crossing rather than a seaport. The definition of inland port in the jargon of the transportation and logistics industries is: an inland port is a physical site located away from traditional land, air and coastal borders with the vision to facilitate and process international trade through strategic investment in multimodal transportation assets and by promoting value-added services as goods move through the supply chain. Inland ports may also be referred to as dry ports or intermodal hubs. Advantages of an inland port: an inland port can speed the flow of cargo between ships and major land transportation networks, creating a more central distribution point. Inland ports can improve the movement of imports and exports, moving the time-consuming sorting and processing of containers inland, away from congested seaports. Examples of inland waterways. Examples of inland ports in the first wide usage are Africa, Mwanza, inland port in Tanzania on Lake Victoria, Kigoma, inland port in Tanzania on Lake Tanganyika. Examples of inland sites: Africa, Vienna, Angola, inland port of Ismailia on the Suez Canal in Egypt, Port of Boma, Boma, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Port of Ilibo, Ilibo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Port of Matadi, Matadi, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Port of Kinshasa, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Port of Kisangani, Kisangani, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Boankra Inland Port, Kumasi, Ghana, under construction. Kisumu Inland Port, Kisumu, Kenya. Transport in Kenya. Embakasi Inland Port, Embakasi, Kenya. Eldoret Inland Port, Eldoret, Kenya. Nairobi Inland Port, Nairobi, Kenya. Port of Brazzaville, Brazzaville, Republic of the Congo. River Port of Kenitra on the Sabao River in Morocco. Haipang Inland Container Depot, Nigeria. River Port of Juba on the White Nile in South Sudan. Swaziland Inland Port, Mbabane, Swaziland. Tororo Inland Port, Tororo, Uganda. Port Bell Inland Port, Port Bell, Uganda. Chipata Inland Port, Chipata, Zambia, under construction. Asia, Port of Suzhou, Suzhou, China. Valappadam Dry Port, Kochi, India. Sialkot Dry Port, Sialkot, Pakistan. Lahore Dry Port, Lahore, Pakistan. Sirsia, Nepal. Europe, Duisburg Inland Port, Duisburg, Germany. Autonomous Port of Paris, Paris, France. Port of Liege, Liege, Belgium. Port of Bratislava, Bratislava, Slovakia. Port of Waterford, Waterford, Ireland. Port of Seville, Seville, Spain, the only inland port in Spain. Port of Moscow, Moscow, Russia. Port of Manchester and Manchester Docks, England. Manchester Ship Canal provides Manchester direct access to the Irish Sea. Gloucester Docks, Gloucester. Birmingham Port and Port of Birmingham, England. Birmingham Canal. Birmingham and Fazeley Canal and Grand Union Canal provide Birmingham direct access to the Atlantic, North Sea and English Channel. North America. Port of Montreal, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Port of Quebec City, Quebec City, Quebec, Canada. Ashcroft Terminal, Ashcroft, British Columbia, Canada. Port of New Orleans, New Orleans, Louisiana. Port of Philadelphia, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Port of Richmond, Richmond, Virginia. Port of Sacramento, West Sacramento, California. Virginia Inland Port, Front Royal, Virginia. Mexico United States border. South America, San Lorenzo Puerto General San Martin Port Complex, San Lorenzo and Puerto General San Martin, Santa Fe, Argentina. Port of Rosario, Rosario, Santa Fe, Argentina. Port of San Nicolas de los Arroyos, San Nicolas de los Arroyos, Buenos Aires, Argentina. Puerto Aguirre, Puerto Quijaro, Bolivia. Puerto Bush, Bolivia. Port of Guayaramarine, Guayaramarine, Bolivia. Port of Riberalta, Riberalta, Bolivia. Port of Porto Alegre, Porto Alegre, Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. Port of Portobello, Porto Velho, Rondônia, Brazil. Port of Manaus, Manaus, Amazonas, Brazil. Port of Santarém, Santarém, Para, Brazil. Port of Asunción, Asunción, Paraguay. Port of Encarnación, Encarnación, Itapúa Department, Paraguay. Port of San Antonio, San Antonio, Central Department, Paraguay. Port of Villeta, Villeta, Central Department, Paraguay. Oceania, Kewdale Freight Terminal, Kewdale, Australia. Minto Inland Port, Minto, New South Wales, Australia. Inland port for Port Botany. Etemogar Inland Port, Albury, Australia. Brighton Transport Hub, Hobart, Australia. Alice Springs Intermodal Terminal. Douin Inland Port, Douin, Victoria, Australia. Warrnambool Inland Port, Warrnambool, Victoria, Australia. Shepparton Inland Port, Shepparton, Victoria, Australia. Altona Inland Port, Altona, Victoria, Australia. Somerton Inland Port, Somerton, Victoria, Australia. Direct Inland Port, Direct, South Australia. Wiri Inland Port, Auckland, New Zealand. Under construction North America. Centreport Canada, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Global Transportation Hub, Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. Port Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. SC Inland Port, Greer, South Carolina, USA. Oceania, Bolivar, South Australia. Moorebank IMEX, inland port for port botany. Proposed Africa Mombasa, seaport. Nairobi, inland port. Nakuru, Eldoret, Kisumu, Jinja, Uganda. Kampala, Uganda. Nsanje, Malawi, inland port. North America, Martinsburg Inland Port, Martinsburg, West Virginia, USA.